All right, folks. So last week we talked about the coronation of King Saul. Well, not the coronation, I guess the choosing of Saul as the king in the two different ways. And now we kind of get to see Saul's first act as king, which has some very interesting details. And then we'll get to Samuel's farewell address. As I was looking though at the what I told you all to read, I think I told on the instructions I said to only read chapter 12 and
Yeah.
I neglected chapter 11.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Oops. I didn't even see that.
So I read it anyway.
Okay, so did everyone read chapter 11?
yes. It's got the
Okay.
grizzly part in it.
Excellent. Okay, I was hoping you all wouldn't notice and we could talk about chapter 11. That was a mistake on my part.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
All
Oh,
right.
yeah.
Mhm. So, the story in chapter 11 starts actually at the end of chapter 10, and I did a little bit of reading, and evidently that last paragraph of chapter 10 is only in the Qumran text. So the Dead Sea Scrolls. So some of your old Bibles, I'm wondering if it has it or not. It begins, now Nahash, king of the Amorites, had been grievously oppressing the Gadites and the Reubenites. Does your
Mhm.
all's Bibles have that?
No.
Mhm.
Oh,
Have it.
Oh, okay. This is
I
why.
have it in mine. Mhm.
So this is one of the interesting, this is like purely just a academic side note. Um, but it is one of the things that gets to be very interesting when we're looking at the Hebrew scriptures. So the majority of what we have, when you think about the Torah that the Jewish community uses today, that being the officially sanctioned version of scripture, it comes from something called the Aleppo Codex. And I forget how old the Aleppo Codex is, but it is much later than the first century. But it is it is the first or the oldest scripture we have in entirety. So we have it from Genesis to the end, wherever they end the prophets. And so that is a complete version of it. And for a long time, the Christian community used the Aleppo Codex as the official version to do our translations of what we would call the Old Testament. When they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, what they discovered is the Dead Sea Scrolls are older by a long shot of the Aleppo Codex, and there's some disagreement on how things are translated, and there is sometimes additions to the Qumran text that just aren't anywhere else. And so the question is, are the Qumran text weird and like this the the community at Qumran just like added in some things? Or is it the more accurate one because it's older? And scholars will argue about this till kingdom come. Because just because it's older doesn't actually make it more correct. Um, and so my Bible stuck it in there,
Mhm.
and then only in the note said this is from the Qumran text. It basically only exists there.
Oh.
There's a few things in this that I know my translation is giving the Qumran text the authority in the situation. Sometimes it will just like footnote some different changes. This is why, if you remember when we were talking about Exodus, the main translation says the Red Sea, but there's an alternative translation that says the Sea of Reeds. That's the Qumran text.
Mhm.
And so, unlike the Gospels we really only have fragments and pieces of. We don't have entire manuscripts. And so that's a different question of how do you choose which pieces for the authoritative text. The Hebrew scripture does have an authoritative text, but it doesn't always agree with the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Mhm.
So, for those who don't have this little paragraph, I'm going to read you kind of the little intro that goes before this that gives a little bit more context, which is, I think, why my version chose to include it. Now, Nahash, king of the Amorites, had been grievously oppressing the Gadites and the Reubenites. He would gouge out the right eye of each of them, and he would not grant Israel a deliverer. Not one was left of the Israelites across the Jordan whose right eye Nahash, king of the Amorites, had not gouged out. But there were 7,000 men who had escaped from the Amorites and had entered Jabesh Gilead. So what we are talking about, if you remember, when the people came up alongside the Jordan, there was a group of people that says, hey, this is great farmland. We don't want to cross the Jordan River. We want to stay here and have our sheep. That's the group of people we're talking about. So the Amorites are coming from the east and oppressing the people on the east side of the Jordan. And the way he's doing this is he's capturing people and taking out one of their eyeballs, but just one, which is gruesome. But the question is, why? Why would this be a strategy?
Well, it shows who's king.
Certainly.
Who's got the power.
Mm-hmm. So why one eye and not two? What would be the advantage of everyone having one eye?
Well, they can still work.
Okay, yeah. So you're not completely incapacitating the population.
Right.
So then why gouge out one of their eyes?
It's a handicap, I think, of depth perception.
Mhm.
Or
Mhm.
Yeah. So another way to say that is you're handicapping them without making them totally disabled. You're just partially disabling them, which people are easier to subjugate if you can't fight back, but you can still work.
Yeah.
Larry, is that what you were gonna say?
Yeah, most people are right-handed. So if they lose their right eye, they've lost, their ability to fight well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So he's effectively trying to make a subservient population.
Mhm.
These people are going to be easy to rule. They don't have their fighting side. They don't have depth perception, but they can still farm. You only need one eye to farm. But notably, some of these men have escaped to a neighboring town, which is where our action picks up in chapter 11. Now it's about a month later from when Samuel anointed Saul king. This is another phrase that my Bible keeps. It is from the Qumran text. Other texts want to make the timelines agree better, and they say it was a week later. This one is saying a month later. Doesn't really matter. Sometime later. We get once again that Nahash, leading the Amorites, goes up and besieges the city where the people had escaped to. So the people ran away from the countryside into the city. Now he's going to attack the city, and he's saying, make a treaty with me and I'll be kind to you. And the leadership of the city says, can you give us a week? Like give us some time to decide. We kind of like our right eye. So let us talk to our folks over here and we'll get back to you. And so this is when they leave and they're trying to get the rest of Israel to help. So with that setup in mind, based on some of the other stories, thinking about what we've discussed in Judges, what kind of response are we expecting? Straight out of the gate. Yes, they've anointed a king, but the king really hasn't done anything kingly yet. what would happen if this is the book of Judges? So thinking about like Deborah or Samson or Gideon, what were the tropes in those stories? There's one tribe that's in trouble. They ask for help. Do others come and help?
Some do, some don't. Okay.
Well, judging from what's going on here, probably not, since they had to threaten them.
Mhm.
I don't remember though, in Judges.
Yeah, well, in Judges, it was more about the one individual. You know, I can't recall much being said what all the other people were doing. Things were so focused on Samson or Reuben, you know.
Right. So that's notably, that's probably for a reason. So there was often a hero that rose up, but it's not that they were able to muscle the entire 12 clans together. It was normally
No.
like one or two that would like come together under a hero and they would go and attack and they would win.
Mm.
And so now this tribe that notably is kind of separate from the other ones is now saying help, 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 help. And it doesn't sound like there's any response until word gets back to King Saul. Now, we are told that King Saul is found on the road walking with a bunch of oxen. So, what do you think about this? He's been anointed king, theoretically. He is technically ruler over the people, and he's just walking around with some oxen. What do you think Saul's been up to in the meantime?
Oh. Well, I thought it was more just a reflection that he was just another ordinary person that got anointed, you know, that he didn't have necessarily have any special attributes that attracted him to Samuel. But even if he did, you know, nobody's making a great deal out of it. He's still just wandering around in his usual life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Clay?
He doesn't seem too worried about an attack.
No. Yeah. I don't know about you all, but I kind of got the feeling like Saul got anointed and then just like went back to his farm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Like he's not like, yay, I'm gonna go build a palace. Let's make a capital city. He's just like, okay, cool, I'm king. I'm gonna go help my dad with the ox. So if you're familiar with the hero's journey of Joseph Campbell, one of the archetypes that Joseph Campbell pulls out is there's the like call, the like call to action for the hero. And then often the hero rejects it the first time. That's actually part of like the archetype is rejecting it and then finally accepting it. And this feels to me kind of like it's falling into that. It's like, okay, I'm king. I don't really know what that means, so I'm gonna keep doing what I know.
Mm.
Until this is kind of the secondary call where all of a sudden he's like, oh shoot, one of my tribes is getting attacked. I'm king. Oh shoot, I'm king. I should do something. And so what he does is something we've talked about before in Judges, specifically Judges 19. If you remember, there was the Levite and his second wife, and he did something very grisly with her after he was attacked and he threw her out there. We talked before that what he did was a call to arms. It just was weird that he did it with a human. We see what that call to arms is supposed to look like in this text. So in verse 6, like Samuel or Saul, there are so many S names in this section. Saul is like filled with rage and the spirit of God, and he just chops up the oxen on the spot. And then he sends messengers to the 12 tribes with a piece of his ox, saying, basically, if you don't appear, you're going to get chopped up like this guy here. And that was considered a sacred call to arms. So they had made a covenant with all the other tribes that when summoned, they would appear. The way to explain this is if you think about, especially World War One, when all the countries before the war got set off, they were all making deals with each other. That's like, okay, well, if you get attacked, I'll come. And if you get attacked, I'll come. And if I get attacked, you two will come, right? And each side was building up those agreements of like, hey, we're going to go into the war. I know we're different countries, but if one of us gets attacked, we all attack, right? That's kind of the deal that the 12 tribes has. If one of them gets attacked, they all need to go in on it if they are given the summons. But besides the Levite giving the summons and starting a civil war, we never really saw that in Judges. And so now, basically his first act as king is Saul gives a summons to the entire tribe to evoke this sacred vow. So as a first act as king, what do you think?
Well, he's the first to unify the whole business.
Yeah, and so what story is he using as that unifying story? Like what kind of, if you were on Saul's media team, what kind of propaganda are you putting out there? What story are you telling?
Well, you tell about the Exodus out of Egypt, the Lord got everybody together and took care of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But he used a really grisly threat. It doesn't sound like they've completely accepted him as the king. He has to threaten them.
So there's the two parts. There's his summons, and then it's how they act after the war. Because yeah, they're not immediately okay with this. And so there's both the kind of this, like, we're all one story. Remember, we are one God, one people of God. But then there's also the threat of like, hey, we also made promises, and if you don't fulfill this, there's consequences. Other thoughts on this is like, what's the story he's evoking? Okay. So unity, both ideas of unity, and I would also argue of protection with one another, that it's like, hey, we have to protect each other if we're going to survive together.
Mhm.
And so he calls people out, he gives them a time and a place. And in verse 8, it says when he mustered them at Bezek, those from Israel numbered 300,000. And we get the numbers from Judah, one of the biggest tribes. And Judah itself sent 70,000. So Judah, this one tribe, is nearly a third of this company. And they send messengers to the town that's being besieged saying, hey, we're coming. We're going to help you out. Tomorrow, when the sun is hot, you shall have your deliverance. And so the inhabitants of Jabesh say, this is one where I wasn't quite sure where Jabesh was, who it was directed at. I'm thinking it's directed at the company of Israel saying, okay, tomorrow we're in your hands. Like, we're gonna stay here and you guys get to do what you gotta do. That is my assumption, unless anyone else read it a different way. Okay. So Saul broke people into 3 companies. We don't get much about the battle other than they won.
Mhm.
So evidently he is a decent strategist if he was just able to, it sounds like, mop the floor with the enemies. But nevertheless, people still come back and say, like, who is Saul that he had the authority to do this?
Mhm.
So why do you think some people, after winning, they won the battle and then they're questioning his authority? Why have this impulse? Is there just something in human nature that people don't like being forced or told what to do?
You think? Okay.
Well,
Well, there must be, because they want to kill the people who said that Saul would be king. I mean, that's just,
huh?
So they did it again. He was anointed again. Hmm?
Yeah. So in verse 12, they're like, who put this Saul over us? Give those people to us, so we're gonna kill him, which is Samuel. They're like basically like, let's kill Samuel because we don't like Saul as king. Other thoughts on why this immediate reaction against him?
I think they were afraid of the power that he came out of nowhere. He was just moving along the road with his oxen, and all at once pulled all this thing together real quickly. And that's scary to have one person have that much power,
So
even
it's
though it was
almost
positive.
so it's almost like they, for the first time, they saw the power that they had just handed over to a king.
Right.
Yeah, Larry?
Well, I was thinking it's almost human nature. No matter who they pick, somebody's going to object to it. You can't please all the people all the time.
Mm. So this is just the squeaky wheel trying to stir up trouble once
Mm.
again. I think there's probably something in both of that that's true, that like there's some people that are just going to complain, but I think all of a sudden, like, this is the first entire 12 tribe summons this group may have seen in their lifetime. Like, at this point, the Civil War that happened was a few hundred years ago. Like, time has passed. And now all of a sudden, just a guy was able to summon every 300,000 men for war.
and I don't know if it's significant that back in an earlier verse, the long chapter 7, or the long verse 7, whoever does not come out after Saul and Samuel, they're put together. And now at the end of chapter 11, it's just Saul.
Mm.
I don't know if that's significant.
It
And
is,
Samuel's
yes.
going to be leaving and giving a farewell speech.
Right. So, the trajectory of Saul at this point is he was wandering around the hills and looking for his father's donkeys. He meets this prophet of God and kind of gets anointed in secret, told he was going to be king, but not really announced to the public. Then a public ceremony happens. They do the casting of the lots, and he's chosen and anointed in front of everyone. But just because he's anointed king doesn't mean he's given the full powers and responsibilities of it. It looks like Samuel has held on to certain parts of power as like the new king kind of adjusts to the role, as we see Saul seems to have not taken to it immediately. But now Saul has acted, like, come into his role. He has acted as king. And so it's like, okay, people are rising up against you. We need to re-anoint you and kind of reaffirm that, like, yeah, this is the way it's gonna be. So,
Oh, he sort of arranged his own job description.
right. Yeah.
yeah, it appears that Samuel was still the judge, but Saul comes up being the general and the warrior, and that's the way he makes his name, is through defeating the Amorites.
So that is a great observation and one that's going to be very impactful as the story goes along. Saul is getting training and kind of has understanding as a general. He is a king of wartime. And as that saying goes, wartime kings are not always good as peacetime kings. But also like Saul's identity, his like act as king, his first act and introduction of what it means to be king is war. So Samuel is still acting as judge, still doing some of the ruling things. Samuel steps in as a general, commander in chief. But now with the ceremony and the re-anointing him, Samuel's kind of saying, okay, here's the rest of the responsibilities. I'm kind of stepping down a little bit, not all the way, but he's stepping down a little bit. But he's reaffirming that, like, okay, y'all, you all wanted a king. You see what he can do. Now he's in charge.
Well, and as long as you had a judge, you didn't need a king. And if Samuel's going to be the last of those and step aside, now there has to be a king.
Mm-hmm. So jumping ahead a little bit, what responsibilities is Samuel holding on to? Because he's not going into retirement and playing golf, playing with his grandkids and not working anymore. You'll find it at the end of chapter 12. He's holding on to a few pieces of his job, but not all of it.
Makes him like a prophet.
Mm-hmm.
So he's able to call on God and get a result.
Yeah. But look at verse 23. What 23 is where he kind of says like, "Hey, I'm going to be around a little bit still."
Oh, I love this. Far be it from me.
Yeah, that really caught my eye.
modern idiom.
Yeah, because that's a real conditional phrase.
Is it?
Yeah.
Far from me.
So what is he talking about in verse 23 here? What does it mean for him to continue to pray for them, especially in case they sin? Like that's not just like in my nighttime prayers, I'm going to pray for you. That actually is a role and a responsibility.
And construct you for the good and right way.
Mm-hmm.
And he's letting everyone know he's not going to fade away. He still is going to have an important position, which is he's going to be the intermediary between the people and God still.
Oh my goodness. And if you will do wickedly, you shall be swept away, both you and your king.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. He's still really holding on.
Well, we'll get to a little bit of this commentary in a moment. So
Okay.
basically what the commentary is saying down below, the scholars are, he is going to stay on as like a prophetic and priestly role. Saul is not allowed to do sacrifices. He's not allowed to do the holy bits. Samuel's going to continue praying and do the official roles. He's going to continue as prophet. He will actually, what this will look like, little sneak peek, he is actually there to temper the king. He is going to be there to challenge. So it's one of those, he's going to continue, he is the one in direct communication with God. He's going to keep talking with God. He's going to keep doing like the sacrifices and the official prayers. And when God gives him a prophetic word, he's going to come out and say it. So he's not in the king's pocket. He's kind of that secondary set of rules where not dissimilar to Aaron and Moses. While Moses had kind of some of that, if you remember, Aaron did all the priestly stuff and Moses led, and that's kind of the relationship they're setting up here. Is Saul is going to lead as the figurehead, but Samuel is staying as the religious figurehead.
Mm-hmm. It was like the Archbishop of Canterbury
Yeah.
in King Henry VIII's time.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
But that brings us to Samuel's farewell address. So this is not farewell, I'm about to die. This is farewell as your official leader. I am no longer your president. I'm not your prime minister. I'm going to be your prophet and your priest now. So here is my farewell in an official role, in the official public role. What are some of the takeaways that you see in this? What's the overall tone of this farewell address?
He sort of reviews the entire history of Israel, from the Exodus, and exhorts them not to lose faith in God, or even though they've abandoned God repeatedly in the past, if they now stay on the straight and narrow, they're going to be okay.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts on the overall gist of this or the tone? Is the tone celebratory?
Well, he's reminding people of all the good things he's done.
Yeah. Okay, so yes, there's a big chunk where he talks about his morality. Why would he bring up how he has led? Like, why bring up, I didn't take bribes. I didn't accept cattle. I did my job. Remember? I did it well. Why start with that?
He doesn't want to get impeached after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like Samuel was a reluctant anointer. I mean, that he didn't really want to give up his role, but his sons were a disappointment, and he could not look to them to take up when he dies. Take up the.
I think he's also proving that he's worthy of this task of continuing. You watch out, because look what I've done in the past. I've been really good. Now I want to continue to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder what Samuel would say about the grisly way of calling the tribes together.
That was normal.
Anything, does he? No.
Oh, Samuel's used to doing sacrifices. Chopping up an animal is part of his job.
Yeah, but using it as a threat.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, Gary?
I just think that what Samuel's doing is a kind of stabilizing reminding people that so many times in the past you've drifted away from the Lord, and I'm going to be here, and I'm qualified. He goes through the list of why he's qualified, and to remind you to stay straight.
Mm-hmm. So part of this is there's the twofold rationale for verses 1 through 5, more or less. The introduction of I haven't done, I've been good. I didn't take bribes. I didn't do this. I didn't do this. I did do this. One is to show that in some ways he is touting his achievements. Hey, I was a good leader. Remember, I was actually pretty good. The implied counterexample is a king will do these things. I want you to remember me because a king is going to take your oxen. Remember me because kings may take bribes. Remember me because all of these things that you liked about me are probably going away. And just remember, you chose this. You chose this. I was good, and you chose something else.
How does he suspects that Saul will not have a moral center, that he will not.
So here's where we talk about who wrote this.
Oh, okay.
So we know specifically, our commentators are saying verses 6 through 15 were likely not part of Samuel's speech. This is very much the tone of it, the language used, the diction involved. This is the Deuteronomistic historian, right? Like filling in the history so people remember. Like there's just certain details, like the fact that they call out like where is it, like Jerubbaal and Barak and Jephthah and Samuel or Samson and those, like that kind of thing. Remember God saved us from the Egyptians. All of this are hallmarks of what the Deuteronomistic historian is obsessed with. And the Deuteronomistic historian, if you remember, they're in Babylon. They saw the downfall of the kings. So they hate the monarchy. And we know a large chunk of this speech they likely wrote themselves. They probably wrote chunks of this passage in Babylon. We know that the language sounds in ancient standards more modern. It doesn't have quite the same, or think about it, there's sometimes where we know what Shakespeare says, and then there's people who try to write like Shakespeare to make it sound old-timey. But Shakespearean historians will know things that are written to sound like Shakespeare instead of actual Shakespeare, right? This is written to sound old, but we know that like this was written later on. So this may not be a critique of Saul himself, but of monarchy in general. And the monarchy fails. And the people in Babylon know that the monarchy's failed. And so even in Saul's critique at the beginning, like, hey, I didn't take bribes, I didn't do this, you can see the hand of the writer kind of saying, remember the kings that were corrupt? Remember how bad they were? Remember all the officials that they kept around them and the court, and how easily it was to bribe one of the people in the court? It says more about the memory of the people writing than the situation they're about to go into. So does that change kind of the perspective being presented here as more of a retrospective than being prophetic? Or is this just talking about human nature and what happens when you give humans power?
Well, it is true that the Israelites repeatedly fell off the righteous path, and, you can look at this as maybe an appeal to the people, that look, God will forgive you. He's forgiven all these bad things you did before. If you just stay on the straight and narrow, everything's going to be all right. But you can't deviate in the future now. We're looking at the future. You can't deviate from what you should be doing.
So what's the implication then if they do deviate?
Well, they're going to get into trouble again, and how many plagues, how many wars do you need before you understand what the rules are?
So if you're one of the people in the crowd that Samuel is talking to, what are you thinking about when Samuel's kind of lecturing you of like, okay, like you people have worshipped the wrong gods, like we've had to get rid of the Baals and acid hearts for a while now. We had to clean out the household gods a few times. You all keep going back and getting punished. You asked for a king. Now that was sinful. That was bad. But God's, as long as you and your king are both righteous, things are gonna be okay.
Right. Yeah.
What are you thinking if you're in the crowd hearing this?
Oh, I'll be good. They think they're gonna be, but they keep failing.
How does it feel to know that your future is caught up in the future of a king? Because it's not just like previously it was you people of God be good or there's punishment. Now it's you people of God, you and your king have to be good. It's not enough if the people are good and the king is rotten. You and your king have to be good. If you're in the crowd, how does that feel to hear?
Kind of scary.
Well, they certainly had their hands full. Well, Saul seems okay so far.
Hold on to that.
Yeah.
I actually have deep affection for Saul, if only because I see him as a tragic character more than he's not a villain per se. He feels more tragic. But he's not necessarily a good king either. So
Yeah. The crowd can say, well, let's give him a chance. Huh?
right.
Let's see what happens.
Now, switching our perspective, how does it feel if you are a person in Babylon? You weren't your parents have told you about what it was like to live in Jerusalem. Your grandparents have told you how scary the troops were, but you've kind of grown up in Babylon. You don't really know that world, but you hear all the stories about it, and you go to the synagogue, and the person in the synagogue reads this to you, this warning. If you and your king are good, everything's gonna be fine. How do those words sound to you, second or third generation Israelite living in Babylon?
Well, at least you have a perspective of what your situation is. That you have to. It's not only you as an individual, but you got to watch over your king too. People in power have to be kept in line because we're all in the same boat.
Yeah. So you're like, okay, there's a responsibility here. But at this point in time, they don't have a king. Their king, technically, is Cyrus of Persia. No, not that yet. That will be. I don't know who the Babylonian emperor is at this point. They're under the rule of the Babylonian emperor. So, but Israel doesn't have a king. So how does it feel to hear that then?
So when they're in exile, who was the king when they got carried off?
It says Nebuchadnezzar. I don't know if I believe
Okay.
Well,
There's many Nebuchadnezzars, so who knows? Yeah, Larry.
they could feel, well, it's all our ancestors' fault. The situation we're in now was because our ancestors didn't behave the way they should have.
And that's how you land with the perspective of that we see with the Deuteromistic historian of, oh, if you follow the rules, everything will go well. And if you don't, God's going to bring a thunderstorm. That's what happened. They must have been bad.
Yeah.
Our ancestors must have really messed up. Oh, it's their fault we're here. It's their fault that we're in the subservient class. I now have an explanation. I know what they did wrong. Because the implication, this works as an implied if-then statement. If you're good, then things will go well. If you're bad, then things will go badly. And they're living out the second one. They weren't good, evidently, because now see the results? We're in exile.
The implication is that they have the power over their destiny, but they don't seem to realize that. They don't know. They haven't got into. Is this the basis of the good works thing? No, no.
That's a Christian idea.
You have, if you're good, you go to heaven. Oh, they don't call it heaven, but if you're good.
So in this point in time, are ideas of the afterlife come from Babylon.
Yeah, okay.
There's not really ideas of heaven or hell before the exile, so it's not really present here. Your benefit for being a righteous person is a good long life. That's kind of the assumption here.
You won't be destroyed.
Yeah, you won't be destroyed. Yeah, that's your reward. So the interesting thing is, this is their explanation of history. This is partially because, so Babylon is what takes the tribe of Judah into exile. If you remember, bifurcated kingdom, Judah and I believe Benjamin are the ones that create the southern kingdom, and then the northern kingdom's the other 10 tribes, and the 10 tribes, they don't fall to Babylon. They fall to the Assyrians, the previous empire beforehand. So in Christmas, in Advent this year, we're gonna read all of the Isaiah text that are all the Christmas texts. To us a child is born, for us a son is given. All of that was written when the Assyrians were attacking. And the mysterious thing is the Assyrians actually make moves to try to conquer Jerusalem. They surround it. And we know this because the Assyrian documents that we have show that this happened, so it's confirmed by other sources. They left overnight, and historians still don't fully understand why. Either the king called them back because there's another war that those troops needed to fight. There was an illness and they were running away from illness. There was something that happened. The people in Jerusalem didn't fight, but the Assyrians surrounded the city and then left. And their explanation was, the northern kingdoms, they were bad. We are good. God protected us. So then the reverse then came true when the next empire came and surrounded the city. And they're like, okay, last time we were good and Jerusalem stayed. Jerusalem didn't fall. But the second time around, Jerusalem did fall. The thing is, if you're a historian and you're not really religious, you're just going to say, Israel couldn't stand a chance against Babylon. Frankly, Israel couldn't stand against the Assyrians. We don't know why the Assyrians left. It's one of those weird mysteries of why the Assyrians left. We don't fully know, but Jerusalem would have fallen the first time around, likely. But something intervened, but nothing intervened the second time. So by both empires coming and going toe-to-toe with Jerusalem, there's an idea that God would have protected Jerusalem if the people were good. Since Jerusalem fell, the assumption is people must have been bad. It must have been a corrupted leadership. The kings weren't good. The people weren't doing what they were supposed to. At some point in time, I feel like I need to put a timeline for these later parts together, because it gets really I know I gave a rundown of the empires rising and falling, but it can be a lot to remember the difference between who the Assyrians attacked and who the Babylonians attacked and what happened and who was where and what was when. So thanks for hanging in there with me. But it's good to know that Jerusalem was besieged multiple times by multiple empires. Sometimes it stood and sometimes it didn't.
Yeah,
So,
God had a big job to protect Israel from all of that.
yeah. So going back to what Samuel is saying, Samuel is still, even though this is probably the Deuteromistic historian looking backwards and writing about how bad the kings were, there's this implication of, because you chose this centralized leadership, the centralized leadership is going to have an effect on you. Which is why all of a sudden it's not just the people's morality, it's the king's morality that's at stake for the well-being of the nation. So why is there this connection? And I think we have a similar conversation going on. I mean, even in the modern times, why are people so heated right now with the morality of the leadership and its effect on the people in general? Like, what effect do good and bad leaders have? So if you have a good moral leader, what effect do you see overall with the people?
There's more trust and people are happy.
Well, but it doesn't always work. We've had some moral leaders who are very low in the popularity.
Yeah, we love Jimmy Carter now, but people hated Jimmy Carter when he was in office.
Well, and also they hate Biden, and I'm trying to think, is he immoral? Let's see. Not personally. But they really did, his and now he's saying things, look, I was really good and I did this and I did that. Just like
So what effect do immoral leaders have on not just the leadership of the country, but how do immoral leaders affect the general populace?
well, I don't think we know yet, but I think it gives somebody, all these dictator kind of people that are out there now are certainly, I think some must be giving permission to their people to be less than good, to be the same as he, but they have to be under his thumb. They can't take.
Well, sometimes people would think that maybe if my leader can do it, then I can do it too. If he's being bad and doing things, then it must not be so bad, and I can do some of those things too.
Well, there's a lot of in Russia. Certainly, there are a lot of the oligarchs. Certainly, are doing things that aren't great.
I don't know.
But I think about
I think it would divide the country.
It'd be interesting to know what the personal morality is of people in these other countries where they've elected.
But sometimes there's also an effect on language. I mean, you all know that I love the study of language and how it affects people. But it's interesting when you have a leader who is how their language affects the language of the general populace. If it's okay for the leader of a country to say hateful things, it's all of a sudden okay for the common person to say hateful things. If the leader of a country is saying things that target one demographic, if you think about I mean, a very coarse example, but how nationalistic rhetoric in the 30s grew, all of a sudden when the leaders who were targeting certain demographics, when the leadership can say it, then the average people say it. If the leadership is targeting Irish immigrants, then it's okay for people in store shops to put no Irish signs.
Yeah, yeah. I just read recently about the hate groups in the 30s, and I was trying to think how that interacted with Roosevelt, what he did about that, and whether, because he was president from what, 1933, 4, 5, I'm not sure, but in any case, as far as anybody knew, he was a moral man and he was doing good things, but he.
See, and here's the thing that I find interesting. Logan and I were talking about Teddy Roosevelt actually, and in some
Teddy
ways he is moral, and so in some ways that I agree with what he did. In other ways, evidently he was quite a jerk of a person to be around. He was a person that didn't always care about other people's feelings, but that made him effective, which is like an interesting, like, huh. I don't know what to do with that always, but there's a certain amount where sometimes, or I don't know, I grapple with that one all the time. That sometimes nice people are less effective, but I don't like
maybe.
that. Sometimes, not always.
Yeah, and it's amazing how language sort of shows you the type of person that the type of persona that you have to the general public. I was thinking of Jimmy Carter, you know, who he was such a moral church attending by school, Sunday school teacher sort of person. And then when he said that he could have lust in his heart, you know, how just, I mean, that just seems so incongruous, you know, to his image. And, you know, and make, well, he's flawed, you know.
Right. Well, when we think back and what used to get people upset,
Mhm.
something like that would.
Yes. So part of it is what are the leaders normalizing? I think that's one way to talk about the effect that leaders have, not just on policies, not just on like agendas and the things that are being, or the bills in Congress, but what is normal, and what kind of attitudes and perspectives are being promoted. But with that, folks, we are at 11 o'clock. Any final thoughts on Samuel's farewell address and his kind of warning to the people?
He doesn't seem to be saying goodbye.
He's saying goodbye as a leader.
As a leader, okay.
Yeah. This is like the presidential farewell address. After this, they are a civilian again. So he's kind of like, goodbye as your official leader. I am stepping down in this role. Yeah, Gary?
Well, he may be, you say, stepping down as a leader, but he's still a rung above Saul.
Oh, in some ways, yes. Religiously, 100%, he is still above Saul.
Well, that's what it's all about, is the religion, or lack of character.
Well, what we are, I believe next week, we have 13 and 14 to read, and the next chapter is Saul doing a naughty. And so we're going to see some of the balance of power and what happens when the king is not respecting that. So, anyways.
14 is really long. Jonathan.
Yes, we get introduced to Jonathan. Oh, wow. 14 is really long.
Yeah.
Really long.
Well, start reading early.
Yeah.
Oh.
All right. If we don't get through it all, that's okay.
Yep.
All right. But shall we pray out for today?
Yep.
All right. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, You have given us warnings about what it means to choose a leader for ourselves. Because often the leaders that we put above us are a reflection in some way of what we are desiring and the kind of culture that we are setting up for ourselves. Our leaders often set norms, they set agendas, they give us expectations, and they do change and influence the culture that we are in. Sometimes it is in ways that we like, sometimes in ways we dislike. So I just want to take time to pray for our leaders. Leadership is not easy, but even in the best of times, but we always hope and pray that our leaders may be moral and guided, that they may have their feet firmly on the ground and advisors around them that can speak truth and wisdom to them, that they may have an ear tuned to justice and to peace, and for the understanding that all people deserve the abundance and dignity that you give to us all in the world. So guide us, your people, to challenge the leaders that need to be challenged, to support the leaders who put forth a vision that is that reminds us of the kingdom of God that you describe. And be with us all until we're able to gather again together. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thanks, Chris.
Of course.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Everybody,
Mhm.
great week.
Yep.